The crisp autumn air in Boston carried the scent of fallen leaves as Brian Thompson stood frozen on his parents' porch, his hand trembling on the doorknob. He had just overheard his father, a staunch conservative pastor, railing against those sinners in the living room, unaware that his own son was one of them. In that moment, Brian knew the secret he'd buried for years. With Jake, the man who made his world make sense, was about to explode, shattering everything he held dear. Brian had always been the golden child in the Thompson family. Growing up in a tight-knit suburban neighborhood outside Boston, he excelled in school, played quarterback on the high school football team, and attended church every Sunday without fail. His father, Reverend Michael Thompson, led the congregation at Grace Community Church, preaching sermons on family values and moral integrity that drew crowds from across the city. His mother, Elizabeth, was the epitome of the devoted wife, organizing bake sales and Bible studies with a smile that hid her unyielding expectations. Brian's younger sister, Sarah, idolized him, often boasting to her friends about her perfect big brother. But beneath the facade of perfection, Brian harbored a truth that gnawed at him like a relentless storm. It started in college at Harvard, where the weight of his family's legacy felt lighter amid the intellectual buzz of Cambridge. That's where he met Jake Rivera, a journalism major with a sharp wit and eyes that seemed to see right through Brian's carefully constructed walls. Jake was openly gay, unapologetic about his identity in a way that both terrified and thrilled Brian. Their first encounter was in a crowded lecture hall during a debate on social justice. Jake challenged the professor on LGBTQ rights, his voice steady and passionate, while Brian sat silently, his heart pounding. After class, Jake approached him, mistaking Brian's stare for disagreement. "You looked like you had something to say back there," Jake said, flashing a grin that lit up his face. Brian stammered, I agree with you, actually. It's just complicated." From that spark, their friendship ignited. Late-night study sessions turned into deep conversations about life, dreams, and the burdens of expectation. Jake shared stories of coming out to his supportive Hispanic family in New York, how his parents embraced him despite their traditional roots. Brian envied that freedom, confessing fragments of his own struggles, the sermons that condemned people like him, the fear of disappointing his father. One rainy evening in Jake's dorm, as thunder rattled the windows, Brian leaned in, and their lips met. It was a kiss that felt like coming home, but it also unleashed a torrent of guilt. Back home for Thanksgiving break, Brian wrestled with the duality of his life. He sat at the dinner table, forcing laughter at his father's jokes about traditional marriage, while texts from Jake burned in his pocket. "Miss you already," one read. Brian deleted it immediately, paranoia creeping in. What if someone saw? What if his secret slipped? He loved Jake, but the thought of his family's reaction, of Reverend Thompson's face twisting in disgust, kept him silent. As the months passed, their relationship deepened in secret. They stole weekends in Boston's hidden corners, walking hand in hand along the Charles River under the cover of dusk. Jake pushed gently for honesty. "You can't live like this forever, Brian. It's eating you up." But Brian resisted, citing his father's influence in the community, the potential scandal that could ruin the church. "It's not just about me," he'd argue. "It's about everyone I care about." The first crack appeared during a family vacation in Cape Cod. Sarah, now a curious teenager, borrowed Brian's phone to check the weather and stumbled upon a photo of him and Jake, arms around each other at a pride event Brian had attended incognito. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing at first. That night, as waves crashed outside their rental house, she confronted him in whispers. "Is Jake your boyfriend?" she asked, her voice a mix of shock and concern. Brian's blood ran cold. "Sarah, please, you can't tell anyone." She promised, but the seed of doubt was planted. Sarah, influenced by their father's teachings, began to question everything. She loved her brother, but the church's doctrine labeled his love as sin. Torn, she confided in a youth group friend, swearing them to secrecy. Word spread like wildfire in small circles, and soon, whispers reached the ears of church elders. Meanwhile, Jake grew impatient. I can't be your secret anymore, he said during a heated argument in their shared apartment. I deserve better than hiding. Brian pleaded, promising change, but the pressure mounted. He started attending therapy sessions in secret, hoping to reconcile his identity with his upbringing. The therapist encouraged self-acceptance, but Brian's mind replayed his father's voice. God doesn't make mistakes, but the devil tempts us all. The tension boiled over at a church fundraiser. Brian, helping set up tables, overheard two deacons gossiping about unnatural behaviors infiltrating the youth. Panic surged. He called Jake, voice breaking. I think someone knows. Jake urged him to come clean, but Brian hung up, deleting their messages in a frenzy. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Sarah's guilt erupted. Dad, I need to talk about Brian, she blurted. The room fell silent. Reverend Thompson's fork clattered against his plate. What about him? Sarah hesitated, tears streaming. He's gay. He's with someone named Jake. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Michael's face reddened, veins bulging. Is this true? He demanded, turning to Brian. Brian's world spun. He nodded, unable to lie anymore. Yes, Dad. I love him. The outburst was immediate. Michael stood, chair scraping back. How could you? After everything we've taught you. Elizabeth gasped, hand over her mouth. Sarah sobbed, regretting her words. Brian fled to his room, packing a bag. Jake picked him up an hour later, holding him as he cried. It's out now, Jake whispered. We can start over. But the fallout was just beginning. Michael disowned him publicly in the next sermon, calling it a test of faith. Church members shunned the family. Donations dropped. Elizabeth, caught between love for her son and loyalty to her husband, slipped into depression. Sarah blamed herself, withdrawing from friends. Brian and Jake moved in together, but the freedom came at a cost. Brian lost his scholarship ties to the church, forcing him to drop out and work odd jobs. Jake's career suffered from association, as conservative circles blacklisted him. Yet, in the quiet moments, Brian felt a glimmer of peace. Was it worth it? Jake asked one night. Brian smiled faintly. I think so. The weeks following the revelation were a whirlwind of chaos for Brian. He crashed on Jake's couch in a cramped Cambridge apartment, the air thick with the scent of takeout and unresolved tension. Job interviews turned sour when potential employers Googled his name and found the scandalous church bulletin, labeling him a fallen son. We're a family-oriented company, one HR manager said politely, her eyes avoiding his. Brian nodded, swallowing the bitterness, and walked out into the biting Boston wind, wondering if honesty was a luxury he couldn't afford. Jake tried to be supportive, cooking simple meals and listening to Brian's rants about his father's hypocrisy. He preaches love, but only if it fits his mold. Brian fumed, pacing the living room. Jake pulled him close, their embraces a rare solace amid the storm. But even Jake had limits. His own family, while accepting, worried about the drama spilling over. Mijo, is this boy worth the trouble? His mother asked over the phone. Jake defended Brian fiercely, but doubts crept in during sleepless nights. Back at the Thompson home, the atmosphere was toxic. Michael buried himself in work, rewriting sermons with veiled references to prodigal sons who stray. He refused to mention Brian's name, as if erasing him could mend the fracture. Elizabeth, however, couldn't let go. She snuck calls to Brian, her voice trembling. Your father is hurting, but he loves you, she'd say. Brian wanted to believe her, but the pain was too raw. Love shouldn't come with conditions, Mom. Sarah, racked with guilt, became the family's silent casualty. At school, classmates whispered about her gay brother, turning her into a pariah. She skipped classes, her grades plummeting. One afternoon, she confronted her father in his study. You drove him away, she yelled, tears streaking her face. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. I did what was right by God. But his conviction wavered in private, as he pored over Bible verses, questioning if he'd misinterpreted them. The conflict escalated when Michael received an anonymous letter from a church member accusing him of hypocrisy for hiding his son's sin for years. The elders called a meeting, pressuring him to step down temporarily. "We need to restore trust," they said. Michael fought back, but the damage was done. Attendance dwindled, and he blamed Brian entirely. Brian, desperate for closure, decided to confront his father. He drove to the church on a rainy Tuesday, heart hammering. Michael was in his office, surrounded by stacks of books. "What do you want?" he barked, not looking up. "To talk," Brian said, voice steady despite the fear. "About us. About why you can't accept me." Michael finally met his eyes, anger flashing. "Because it's wrong, Brian. The Bible is clear." "Is it? Or is that what you've been taught?" Brian challenged, recounting stories of loving same-sex couples in history, of evolving interpretations. Michael dismissed them, but a seed of doubt was planted. The argument turned heated. "You're destroying this family," Michael shouted.
No, Dad.
"Your hate is," Brian replied, storming out. That night, Jake found Brian staring at old family photos. "I miss them," Brian admitted. "We'll build our own family," Jake assured him. But betrayal lurked. One of Jake's friends, Mark, a closeted gay man envious of their openness, leaked details of their relationship to a local conservative blog. The post went viral. "Pastor's son living in sin, a cautionary tale." Reporters camped outside their apartment, microphones thrust forward. "How do you respond to your father's condemnation?" one asked. Brian froze, but Jake stepped up. "Love isn't a sin. Bigotry is." The exposure brought unexpected allies. A progressive church group reached out, offering support. Brian spoke at a rally, his voice gaining strength. "I lost my family, but I found myself," he declared, the crowd cheering. Yet the toll was heavy. Elizabeth suffered a breakdown, hospitalized for anxiety. Sarah ran away briefly, found at a friend's house, begging to see Brian. When they reunited in a park, she hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's not your fault," Brian said, holding back tears. "Dad's teachings poisoned us all." Michael, facing empty pews, grappled with remorse. He visited Elizabeth in the hospital, confessing his fears. "What if I was wrong?" he murmured. She squeezed his hand. "Then fix it." But pride held him back. Instead, he doubled down, organizing an anti-LGBTQ seminar, inviting controversial speakers. Brian learned of it through Sarah and decided to attend incognito, heart racing. Slipping into the back row, he listened as speakers spewed rhetoric about saving souls. When his father took the stage, quoting scriptures, Brian stood. "Dad, stop this." Gasps rippled through the audience. Michael faltered. "Brian, what are you doing here?" "Showing you the face of who you're condemning," Brian said, voice echoing. Jake, who had come for support, stood beside him. The confrontation made headlines, splitting the community. Some members left in protest, others rallied behind Michael. The family teetered on the brink. In the aftermath, Brian and Jake's relationship strained under the spotlight. "Is this what you wanted?" Jake asked during a fight. "Constant drama?" "I didn't choose this," Brian snapped. "But I won't hide anymore." They reconciled, but the scars deepened. Brian took a job at an LGBTQ advocacy group, channeling his pain into purpose. Jake pursued investigative journalism, exposing hypocrisy in religious institutions. As winter set in, a tentative olive branch came. Elizabeth invited Brian to Christmas dinner, without Michael knowing. He arrived wary, Jake by his side. The table was set, but tension hung heavy. Sarah beamed, hugging them both. Elizabeth smiled weakly. "Your father. He's trying." But Michael arrived early, face hardening at the sight of Jake. "What's he doing here?" "He's part of me, Dad," Brian said firmly. The dinner dissolved into arguments, old wounds reopening. Michael stormed out, leaving Elizabeth in tears. Brian left feeling defeated. "Maybe some bridges can't be rebuilt," he told Jake. Spring brought tentative renewal to Boston, but for Brian, it felt like navigating a minefield. His advocacy work at the Center for Equality consumed him, organizing workshops on coming out and family reconciliation. Colleagues praised his passion, but privately he battled imposter syndrome. Who am I to advise others when my own family is shattered? He confided in Jake one evening, as they walked through the public garden, cherry blossoms fluttering like fragile hopes. Jake squeezed his hand. You're proof that survival is possible. Their love had weathered the storm, but cracks showed. Jake's career stalled. Editors shied away from his pitches, fearing backlash from conservative advertisers. It's like I'm tainted by association, he grumbled. Brian felt guilty. I never wanted to drag you down. It's us against the world, Jake replied, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. The real blow came from an unexpected source. Sarah, now in therapy, revealed during a phone call that Michael had been meeting with a counselor specializing in LGBTQ issues. He's reading books, Brian. Asking questions. Hope flickered, but Brian guarded his heart. Actions speak louder than words. The mending began subtly. Elizabeth started attending PFLAG meetings, parents of LGBTQ children sharing stories that mirrored her own. She reached out to Brian, inviting him for coffee. At a quaint cafe in Back Bay, she apologized. I should have stood up for you sooner. Brian teared up. It's not too late, Mom. Their reconciliation inspired Sarah, who advocated for an inclusive youth group at church. But Michael resisted change, clinging to doctrine. Until a health scare, a mild heart attack during a sermon, forced reflection. In the hospital, staring at the ceiling, he pondered his legacy. Have I driven my son away for nothing? He whispered to Elizabeth. Post-recovery, Michael emailed Brian. We need to talk. No judgments. Brian hesitated, showing Jake the message. What if it's a trap? What if it's genuine? Jake countered. They met at a neutral park bench, the Charles River glistening under the sun. Michael looked older, lines etched deeper. I've been wrong, he admitted haltingly. Not about my faith, but about how I applied it. Love thy neighbor. That includes you. Brian's breath caught. Do you mean that? Michael nodded. I want to understand. Tell me about Jake. For hours, they talked. About Brian's journey. The pain of rejection. The joy of love. Michael listened, occasionally wincing at hard truths. I can't change overnight, he said. But I'm trying. The meeting ended with an awkward hug. The first in months. Brian returned home elated. Maybe there's hope, he told Jake. But society's prejudices loomed. At a pride parade, Brian and Jake marched proudly, banners waving. Counter-protesters hurled slurs, one throwing a bottle that grazed Jake's arm. Faggots! They screamed. Adrenaline surged. Brian confronted them, but security intervened. Shaken, Jake bandaged his wound at home. This is the world we're fighting, he said grimly. The incident fueled Brian's activism. He organized a town hall on hate crimes, inviting Michael as a speaker. To his surprise, his father agreed. On stage, Michael shared his transformation. I once preached division. Now, I see unity in love. The audience applauded, but not all. A former church member heckled, Traitor! The backlash was swift. Michael lost more congregants, his position precarious. At home, he argued with elders. If the church can't evolve, it's doomed. Elizabeth supported him, their marriage strengthening through adversity. Sarah thrived, coming out as an ally to her friends. For Brian and Jake, the progress was bittersweet. Jake received a job offer in D.C., a prestigious position. It's my dream, he said excitedly. Brian smiled, but worry gnawed. Long distance. We'll make it work, Jake assured. Before leaving, Jake proposed during a sunset picnic. Marry me, Brian. Through all this, you're my constant. Tears flowed. Yes. The engagement brought joy, but also new conflicts. Michael offered to officiate, a gesture of amends. If you'll have me. Brian accepted, but doubts lingered. What if he backs out? The wedding planning exposed fissures. Conservative relatives boycotted, sending scathing letters. "You're enabling sin," one aunt wrote. Sarah defended fiercely online, her post going viral. "Love is love. Support my brother or unfollow." The ceremony approached amid tension. On the eve, Michael visited Brian. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice thick. "I almost lost you." Brian embraced him. "You almost did." The wedding day dawned bright. In a garden venue, friends and allies gathered. Michael stood at the altar, beaming as Brian and Jake exchanged vows. In sickness and in health, for better or worse. Cheers erupted. Elizabeth wept happily. Sarah captured photos, grinning. But not all was resolved. Post-honeymoon, Jake's DC job strained their bond. Late-night calls replaced intimacy. "I miss you," Brian said often. "I know," Jake replied wearily. Distance bred insecurity. Brian suspected Jake of drifting, misinterpreting friendly texts. One night, he accused him baselessly. "Are you seeing someone?" Hurt flashed in Jake's eyes over video. "After everything?"
No.
The fight escalated, words like daggers. "Maybe we rushed this," Jake snapped. Brian hung up, regret flooding him. Reconciliation came during a visit. They talked honestly, recommitting. "We fought for this," Brian said. "We can't let go." Yet, external pressures persisted. Michael's church split, half forming a progressive faction under him, the other clinging to tradition. He faced death threats, forcing security measures. One evening, a brick shattered their home window. A note attached, "God hates fags." The family united in fear. Brian rushed over, Jake in tow. "We're in this together," he declared. Michael nodded gratefully. Family endures. As summer faded, Brian reflected on the journey. The betrayals, damages, awakenings. He wrote a memoir excerpt, sharing online. Responses poured in, some hateful, others inspiring. Fall returned to Boston with a chill that mirrored the lingering uncertainties in Brian's life. His marriage to Jake, now 6 months strong, navigated the choppy waters of long distance. Weekends in D.C. were passionate reunions, but weekdays dragged with loneliness. Brian threw himself into advocacy, leading campaigns against conversion therapy, drawing from his own near-miss when Michael had once suggested it subtly. "No one should endure that torture," he told crowds at rallies, his voice resonant with personal anguish. Jake's journalism flourished in the Capitol, exposing scandals in anti-LGBTQ legislation. His articles garnered awards, but the stress showed. "These politicians hide behind faith while destroying lives," he vented during a call. Brian listened, offering support, but sensed Jake's growing disillusionment. "Come home," Brian urged. "We can fight from here." "I can't abandon this," Jake replied, conflicted. The strain peaked during a visit. Over dinner in a cozy Georgetown bistro, Jake confessed, "I feel like I'm losing myself in this city." Brian reached across the table. "Then let's find a way together." Their intimacy that night reaffirmed their bond, but morning brought reality. Jake boarded his train back, leaving Brian with an aching void. Family dynamics evolved unevenly. Michael's new progressive church thrived in a rented hall, attracting diverse congregants. He preached inclusivity, quoting verses on compassion. "God's love knows no bounds," he declared. Elizabeth blossomed as a co-leader, hosting support groups. Sarah, now in college, majored in social work, inspired by the turmoil. But old wounds festered. A distant cousin, fueled by resentment, sued Michael for misappropriating church funds during the split. A baseless claim, but costly to defend. Legal bills mounted, straining finances. Michael confided in Brian over coffee. "This is the price of change." Brian offered help from his savings. "We're family." Gratitude softened Michael's features. "I don't deserve you." "You do now," Brian said. Society's backlash intensified. A national debate on gay rights erupted when a bill proposing protections stalled in Congress. Jake covered it relentlessly, interviewing activists and opponents. One interview with a firebrand conservative turned confrontational. Homosexuality is a choice, the man sneered. No, Jake countered on air. Hate is. The clip went viral, painting Jake as a hero and a target. Threats arrived via email, forcing him to hire protection. Brian panicked, flying to D.C. This is dangerous. It's necessary, Jake insisted. Their argument escalated in Jake's apartment. You're risking us for a story. For our future, Jake shot back. Tempers cooled, but resentment simmered. Brian returned home unsettled. A turning point came at Thanksgiving. The family gathered at Michael's new home, Jake joining via video due to work. Laughter filled the air as they shared stories. Michael raised a toast to second chances. Later, alone with Brian, he admitted, I regret the years I lost. Me too, Brian said. But we're here now. Sarah pulled Brian aside. I'm dating someone, a girl. Her coming out, though surprising, warmed him. Be proud, he advised. The holiday harmony shattered when Jake called urgently. I got a lead on a corruption story involving anti-gay lobbyists. It's big. Brian's heart sank. Be careful. Days later, disaster struck. Jake was assaulted outside his office, mugged by assailants shouting slurs. Hospitalized with bruises and a concussion, he called Brian sobbing. They knew who I was. Brian rushed to his side, holding him through the night. I'm not leaving you again. The attack awakened Michael. He flew down, embracing Jake for the first time. I'm sorry for everything. Jake nodded weakly. Thank you. Recovery was slow. Jake took leave, moving back to Boston temporarily. They rented a house in the suburbs, rebuilding intimacy. This scare clarified things, Jake said. I want a life with you, not just survival. Brian agreed, proposing they start a family through adoption. Let's create what we almost lost. The process was arduous: background checks, interviews, exposing vulnerabilities. Social workers probed their past. How has your family's rejection affected you? One asked. It made me stronger, Brian replied. Michael testified on their behalf. They're loving, committed men. Approval came, but with caveats. They welcomed a foster child, a boy named Liam, orphaned by tragedy. The responsibility terrified and thrilled them. As Liam settled in, challenges arose. He acted out, testing boundaries. Why do I have two dads? He asked innocently. Because love comes in many forms, Brian explained. Family support proved crucial. Elizabeth babysat, Sarah mentored. Michael read bedtime stories, his voice gentle. Yet, external threats persisted. A local ordinance threatened LGBTQ rights, prompting protests. Brian led one, Jake documenting. Counter-protesters clashed, police intervening. In the melee, Brian was arrested for disorderly conduct, a trumped-up charge. Jailed overnight, he called Jake. This is the cost. Bailed out, he faced trial. Media sensationalized. Pastor's son turns activist rebel. Michael attended court, speaking in defense. My son fights for justice. The charges dropped, but the ordeal exhausted them. Winter brought reflection. Over hot cocoa, Brian and Jake discussed their journey. We've paid dearly, Brian said. But gained more, Jake added. Liam's laughter echoed, a reminder of hope. With Liam's adoption finalized, Brian and Jake's home buzzed with new energy. The boy, with his curly hair and inquisitive eyes, brought chaos and joy. Spilled milk at breakfast, bedtime stories that stretched into the night. Brian quit full-time advocacy for a consulting role, balancing fatherhood. Jake freelanced from home, his exposés now focused on family rights. We're building something real, Jake said, watching Liam play in the yard. But peace was fragile. Michael's church faced vandalism. Graffiti scrawled across the doors. Sinners welcome? Hell no. Police investigated, but suspects evaded capture. Michael stood firm, sermonizing on perseverance. Trials forge our faith. Elizabeth worried constantly. Is it worth the risk? For our grandson, yes, Michael replied, embracing his evolving role. Sarah graduated, interning at an NGO. She visited often, bonding with Liam. Uncle Brian is a hero, she told him. The family reunited for Liam's birthday, a backyard barbecue. Laughter mingled with the sizzle of burgers. Michael pulled Brian aside. You've taught me more than I ever preached. Brian smiled. Love changes everything. Yet undercurrents of doubt persisted. Jake received an anonymous threat, echoing his assault. Watch your back, freak. They installed security, paranoia shadowing their days. The climax came at a national conference on equality, where Brian spoke alongside Jake. Our story is one of loss and redemption, Brian declared. But how many more must suffer? Protesters disrupted, chanting hate. Security escorted them out, but one slipped through, lunging at Jake. Brian intervened, taking a punch to the face. Chaos ensued, arrests made. In the hospital, stitches on his brow, Brian held Jake's hand. Enough is enough. Post-incident, they retreated, focusing on Liam. Therapy helped process traumas. We've sacrificed so much, Jake admitted. For what? Brian questioned. For truth, Jake said. Michael visited, bearing gifts. I'm stepping down from the pulpit, he announced, to focus on family. Shock rippled. Why? Brian asked. I've preached enough. Now I live it. The transition allowed healing. Michael volunteered at the center counseling struggling parents. His presence bridged gaps. As years blurred, Liam grew into a confident teen, aware of his dad's story. I'm proud, he said, but reflections brought debates. Brian wrote a book, Fractured Faith, A Gay Son's Journey, sparking controversies. Reviews polarized. Some hailed it as enlightening, others decried it as blasphemous. At a book signing, an old church member approached. You destroyed a good man, she accused. No, Brian replied calmly. I freed him. Jake's career rebounded with a Pulitzer nomination for his series on hate crimes. Fame brought scrutiny but also influence. The family gathered for holidays, traditions evolving. No more rigid prayers. Instead, gratitude circles. Yet the costs lingered, lost friends, scarred psyches, financial strains. Sarah married her girlfriend in a ceremony Michael officiated, tears flowing. In quiet moments, Brian pondered the trade-offs. Was the pain necessary? He asked Jake. To reach this peace? Yes, Jake affirmed. The story culminated in a reflective evening. As stars dotted the sky, Brian sat with his father on the porch. Do you regret anything? Michael paused. Only the time I wasted in ignorance. Brian nodded. Me too. The hiding, the fear. Their bond, forged in fire, endured. But questions remained. Had the betrayals been inevitable? The damages irreparable? In the end, awakening came at a steep price, leaving scars that told of battles fought and won. Was it right to upend a family's foundation in pursuit of personal truth? Or does loyalty demand silence at all costs?